Gaelic la Hamas fellow Palatle, Nugo Am Oa, the guy Tanaka Quickpursuit, and
Dawson, right? Did I get the last name right?
Dawson. My name is Bob Chamberlain. I'm the chief of the Quickpursuit and Hukwatmis First Nations of the Moose Magdaleno Tribal Council. Many of you know our territories collectively as the Broughton Archipelago. I want to commend the work that's been described here today about the 5 years of work, how collaborative it is, how you've engaged with First Nations, how you developed a governance model and a framework for engagement with stakeholders, developing EBM, marine use planning, having area technical teams with capacity to assist those communities, and working with decision makers and stakeholders. Now, for our graphic recorder on the other side of the room, I'd like you to put a great big black hole, because that's what the Broughton Archipelago represents in relationship to what you're talking about. There has been no discussion with our First Nations.
The question?
I'm getting to the question. Thank you. I have several questions. There was mention of the LRMP process and how that's feeding into PNCIMA. How? And then what about the First Nations that were not part of the CCLRMP like ours? And then does this then further increase the black hole that's going to be drawn? When you talk of all the capacities, I would love to have the capacities available to our tribal council for planners, GIS, technical teams, socioeconomic planners, marine biologists. That would be really nice, but they're not there. I wonder also at this point to what degree capacity has been provided to regional districts, municipalities, NGOs. Because my guess is, given that the current legal stature of First Nations in Canada, that you have a very clear obligation to us first. And so I'm here telling you now that there is a group of First Nations in an area that is very, very contentious. I mentioned the Broughton Archipelago. I know everyone in this room knows where it is. And it's a very unique set of circumstances that are going on there. And I wonder if this process is aware that we are at odds with our regional district about aquaculture. And I have a concern that they may be involved in this process, moving that industry forward, talking about an area that we hold title to. And I wonder, how does like with our colleagues, let's call them from the province here, how does the title and rights recognition legislation fit into this?
Okay, and we better start addressing some of these.
One of the last question I have is there going to be funding made available to unique areas such as the Broughton Archipelago? And in closing, I would like to speak to, I didn't catch your name, but the man from the province that suggested some of our First Nation warriors show up at a Canuck game. I take offense to that.
Okay, thank you. A number of questions to choose from. People can address them talking about how LRMP terrestrial planning processes will fold into or feed into this process. What about capacity, uneven capacity among different stakeholders and other groups, including First Nations? And how does the title and rights discussion fit into all of this, very broadly speaking? Anybody want to start?
I could start. Bob, I've got several thoughts on your questions, and Jamie and others may wish to pick up some of them as well. First of all, on the issue of the Broughton Island First Nations engagement, I think that's a good point. In fact, over the next 2 days, we are going to be considering the broader issues of engagement, obviously with First Nations, but not just beyond. We have had, I think, very constructive discussions and conversations with First Nations in many of the communities in the north, but not all. And so, okay, you make a good point, and we need to consider that over the next couple of days. With respect to funding from the federal side, as you are familiar with, we do have ARM and Aboriginal Fisheries Strategy Program resources. Some of those resources are available for capacity building and are aimed at technical support. And those kinds of activities we think could be brought to bear to look at capacity along the lines that you've raised. So that's something that we could also consider. You've raised several other observations that I think others may wish to speak to, but I just want to underline what you started with. You noted the principles and the ideas that were suggested and outlined by a variety of speakers today were constructive and thoughtful. And I just don't want to lose that point. We will work on the issue of engagement. We will work on the issue of involvement and participation. But we want to realize exactly those ideas that you noted in your opening remarks.
Just so you know that those were tongue-in-cheek remarks at the outset. And we did have a meeting last week with Will Fledke from DFO, and the department has finally seen the wisdom to have an ARM position within the Broughton Archipelago area. And then I urge this initiative to come forward and do the same.
Okay. Anybody else want to respond to any of the questions that were raised?
Bob, I just want to say I'm very sorry if my comments created any offense to you, and I apologize sincerely for that. The point I thought I was trying to make was that how much I have learned as an individual and how I've seen processes learn from the traditions that we have developed now through, at the beginning of all of our meetings, acknowledging the First Nations peoples. As many in this room do, we sit on the Aquatic Management Board on the west coast of the island. We have a tradition there where at each meeting we have to learn a new Chalnoth word. And as I learn more about the spirituality of First Nations and their connections to our land and sea, I've seen, as I indicated personally, how much I'm enriched by that and the processes. My attempt to try and help the Vancouver Canucks as they get to the playoffs, I really do apologize to you sincerely for any offense that those remarks caused to you.
We're going to go to table 20, and the next one will be table 18.